Okay, in this video I want to talk about the water cycle and how that works, which is again, water, like all matter, is recycled in the environment, and that the water that we have today is basically the same water that existed on this planet for the last 4 billion years. All right, so how does this work? Well, let's start over here. You have atmospheric water, and that atmospheric water vapor falls as precipitation and goes in one of two directions. Now, I'm going to start off by doing something that always gets me in trouble. Your book is wrong. Okay, your book talks about precipitation and talks about rain, which comes down and forms runoff. And that's how water gets in. And of course, water falls into the ocean, it runs on the land, it seeps into the soil. It actually, your book though, leaves out something that I think is kind of important, is that precipitation also is snow. And that's one thing that I think most people don't actually recognize is a very, very, very important source of water that humans use. Actually, I can think of two classic examples for that. There's the Himalayan mountains. Now, as you probably know, there's a couple of very, very small, unimportant countries called India and China, okay, which represents something like a third of the Earth's population. Well, much of China and much of India depend on the melting of the glaciers in the Himalayan mountains for their water. That's actually where the bulk of their fresh water comes from. All right, so the fact that the glaciers up in those places are shrinking is actually of significant concern to a lot of people. All right, so snowpack is also an important source of water. All right, but as that snow melts, it all winds up being run off at some point, and the water that runs off goes in one of two places. Either the water runs off directly into oceans and lakes, okay, or it infiltrates, it seeps down through the ground, and it recharges the groundwater. All right, that's a very, very important process as well. All right, one of the reasons for that is, of course, that many people who depend on a well know that recharging the groundwater, refilling the water that's actually underground, is very, very, very important. The other thing that's important is that groundwater is where the plants get their moisture, and the plants, their growth and the plants absorb the water through their roots, and then they are actually a very major, important part of the water cycle, because what plants do, most of the water they absorb through the roots actually is released back into the atmosphere in a process known as transpiration. Now, this process is so incredibly important that it actually has a major impact on the weather. One of the examples is, as you probably know, the Amazon rainforest has been cut back significantly since what it's been in historic times. Okay, it's shrunk by, I think, about a third. All right, well, that Amazon rainforest, with the enormous amount of water that it was pumping the atmosphere, they're thinking that that actually probably has a pretty significant impact on the fact that there are now more droughts in Africa than there ever have been. All that jungle was pumping moisture up into the atmosphere, which was, of course, crossing the Atlantic Ocean and then falling back down as rain on Africa. So if you decrease the amount of transpiration going on, you decrease the amount of water in the atmosphere and decrease the amount of rain. Okay, so what else is going on with this image? Well, the other thing that happens, of course, groundwater eventually does work its way also back into the oceans. Okay, and oceans and other bodies of water, lakes, streams, water evaporates off of them. And of course, in the process of evaporation, that water goes back into the atmosphere. All right, water is fixed. Okay, for the most part, it simply gets recycled. There is one other process that does occur, that is not mentioned in the cycle. I'm going to bring it up, but it's not something that they talk about as part of the water cycle. Is that in addition to transpiration, another thing that happens is that plants actually undergo photosynthesis. Now, in photosynthesis, the water is actually destroyed. It's broken down into hydrogen and oxygen, and it's used to make carbohydrates. All right? That's kind of a different story, but what happens is, as the plants grow and they produce carbohydrates, then animals come along and break down the carbohydrates, and of course, when they exhale, they release the carbohydrates back as water vapor again. All right, so that's another part of the water cycle that isn't mentioned here, but it isn't actually a significant way that water gets back in the atmosphere is respiration.